Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I want to make a very interesting video today and just, kind of clock in with me here, especially to the Muslims and also to non-Muslims. This will really dispel some media propagated stuff about Islam and a key thing that a lot of people is like a trigger word for them, right? Especially in today's society. And that is Sharia law. Now, wait, before you pause off or say, okay, well, one day this guy's gonna go on about Sharia law and this, that, no. Just listen to me. Like, I'm not here to preach Sharia law. I'm not here to say that Sharia law, is gonna come to you, the West or something, but that's not accurate for me to say that. I mean, obviously, I'd want it because put yourself in any position, like whatever you believe in, you'd want everyone else to believe in that, right? So if you are a Muslim and you accept and you think Sharia law is good, which I do personally, right, and stick with me and you might see my reasonings as well, then of course you'd want that for everyone else. So that's just my reasoning, but I'm not saying that's going to happen, or we're going to start a riot, or we're going to start kicking people out or doing something aggressive or something like that, because of course we're not allowed to do that. Islamically, politically, there's many reasons, right? But my main point isn't that. My main point is there's something that happened during the colonial phase which really kind of demonized and led to the demonization and the misunderstanding of Sharia law. And it's this concept, and it's these two concepts. So we have the idea of Sharia law, right? Which is the actual law. Like you have any legal system, the US, UK, Canada, Spain, wherever. Every place has laws, right? Even Christianity, even Judaism, like, right? A lot of religions have sets of rules that you have to follow, right? Fine. So there was the Sharia law, which is basically the law for made by the Islamic faith, set by the Islamic faith, right? Then there is also another concept that is partnered with Sharia law, which goes hand in hand with Sharia law, which isn't talked about as much, which is aada in Arabic, or urf, which means customs, or the common practice of people, right? In English, basically, which is an accurate translation. Because a lot of people will think and they'll say stuff like, how can Islam, which is a religion from like 1400 years ago, still survive and still be practical to modern day life? Well, it's because Sharia law, even after the time of Prophet, peace be upon him, Muhammad Sallallahu, has always incorporated aspects of culture. Because, well, the Sharia doesn't speak about everything. Sorry, in the video at this point, I said Sharia law doesn't what do you call it, sets the foundation and doesn't like specify everything, but that's a bit inaccurate. What I meant to say was the Quranic principles, or the things that define the Quranic principles, like Quran, Hadith, and everything, won't be able to give you like all the cultural and the lived experiences, but obviously they'll give you the principles. That's my main point, not that actual Sharia law doesn't incorporate the culture, because I kind of contradict that and basically prove that it does, because it does. Anyway, that's just a little detail. Think of it as like setting a foundation. Like, these are the boundaries in which you can work. Now, what you do within those boundaries is your own thing. And what defines that? The customs of people, the cultural norms, the culture, the attitudes of people, what's known, what's not known, things like that. That all influences Sharia, right? And the laws that are made. So the laws that were passed in, older manuscripts of Sharia law or laws, right, they wouldn't still be applicable today, purely because a lot of them, the core fundamentals of that are based on the unchangeable aspects of Islam. Like, some principles, we get them for the Sharia law, we get principles from, like Quran, Hadith, which are the primary sources, like the Quran, which is the direct word of God, Hadith, which is the statements of the Prophet, which is inspired to him by God. Then you have like the statements of the people who were his companions and his disciples, etc. Right? Those are the primary basis. They set like the, if you want to call it, like the parameters, right? Or they set like the kind of boundaries. Now, within those boundaries, some rules are gonna fall. Some rules maybe they were according to the customs of a certain place by the ruler of that place, and they had certain customs, and you to understand those customs, understand where those rules are coming from. And so that's why a lot of them will still not be applicable today, because, well, guess what? Maybe we don't apply that same metric of measurement, or maybe we don't apply that same metric of finance, or how finances work, or how marriages work, or how societies work, or how governments work, or how people speak, or what's culturally acceptable, even. All of these factors play into things like marriages, inheritance laws, things like um well stuff business, commerce, all of these things that are social things, right, day-to-day things, these are all influenced by culture and a lot of what people accept and deem normal. Another thing, big thing about that is, like modesty rulings, right? So you'll notice that obviously Islam is a precedence of modesty, right, which is fine, it's accepted, but the way that's expressed is different, right? For example, Islam will say everyone has to be modest. To what level do you have to be modest? For example, they'll set a parameter and they say for men, they must have the area covered from the belly button to the knee by majority, right? And for women, it's the body except the face, hands, and feet, right? Or there's difference of opinion regarding the feet, etc., stuff like that. But my main point is that regardless of that difference of opinion, whichever opinion you follow, that sets the parameters. Do you get what I'm saying? Like you have to cover from this area to this area. Or for example, that's just for an example. That could be anything. You could apply the same principle to finance, to marriage, to whatever. This is the legal principle that we have set, right? According to the scholars and according to the customs and the Sharia law and considering the Hadith, Quran, everything. Now, how that's expressed is completely fine and justified to be different to different people, different customs, different needs. That's fine. So, for example, men in different areas wore different clothing based on the culture and the customs of that place, right? In some hotter climates, they'll wear, thinner materials, maybe less, they might wear less clothing because, it's hotter, maybe it might get stuffy, right? So they might just cover, the aura, the part that needs to be covered, and maybe they might cover a bit less. And colder places, they might cover up in different materials or differently, right? In different fashion. Same thing with women, right? It's not just that they homogeneously all wore, the same kind of attire across the whole empire, because Islam didn't come to erase culture and didn't come to erase people. Rather, it came to enhance that. Like, you be your own people, be yourself, right? But do that within the limits and bounds that Sharia has set for you, right? So, for example, if you look at historically across the Muslim Empire, the way that women express modesty has been so different. Like some women wore, looser dresses, some women covered their face, some didn't, some went full coverage of the face, some didn't, some covered their eyes. It all depended on the culture, customs, need, wants of the time, right? That's there. Now, some people are going to make an objection and say, okay, well, how can you support that? That's all fine, but there are some very strict aspects of it which we cannot deny. And I will not deny them as well. And I'll address them very straightforward and front on right now. Like, for example, the rulings on adultery or fornication, the rulings on theft, the rulings on, leaving the faith. If you're born into it, if you've accepted it once, leaving, right? Penalties for that can be very strict. And other penalties that can also be strict, right? So when it comes to discussing these, again, the culture, customs, and norms are also considered, not just a rule. Yes, Islam does set a precedent for that, and there's a wisdom behind that. And I'll tell you why this sets a precedent for that. Because let's just take one example like theft, yeah? And we'll get into adultery and those in a bit, right? So, for example, theft. You steal from someone. In the current legal system, you steal from someone, the max a person can do is they can spend time in prison, pay a fine, whatever, right? But my point is, it doesn't tackle the root issue of disciplining that person in a way where they will never, ever, ever consider doing theft again, right? And even if, and the legal system nowadays makes it such that if a person is 100% definitively proven to be a thief, right? There's nothing that can, like actually stop them from theft, if you get what I'm trying to say. And that they're going to do it again. And maybe they've had a track record of stealing and there's nothing to stop them except just send them to prison. Do you get what I'm trying to say? Whereas Islam's like, okay, look, we will never, the punishment for theft is to chop the hand off. And, it goes like that for different thefts, for the more thefts you do, right? So the procedure is, if the person is caught the first time, first hand chopped off. Next time, the opposite feet is chopped off. Then it's lifetime imprisonment. Now, why is it like that? Because obviously you need one hand to, eat and manage. You need one feet to walk. Otherwise, you're basically disabled. And Islam doesn't want to do that. It wants you to have your bare necessities. But the fact that you've stolen means that you deserve that. Now, why do you deserve that? Do you get what I'm saying? Maybe they might have, changed it up. That's the point. The point is that Islam sets the bar so high to even get that punishment that in reality, it doesn't get implemented that often. And same thing with adultery case, same thing with the leaving the faith cases. They set the bar they set the bar high on purpose because they know the punishments are capital death punishments, and they don't want to do that. Rather, they want to give every reason, and it's actually a core principle within the Islamic rulings itself that a judge should make excuses if there's any shadow of a doubt. Like there has to be 100% assurance that this is gonna happen. Then we do that. Otherwise, if there's even a bit of a doubt and the judge has any reason to suspect, he'll call off the entire punishment, right? He might give some disciplinary warning. He might say, don't do this, don't blah blah blah, blah. You don't want to get into the situation again. I don't want to see you again, whatever. But he won't do the capital punishment. It'll be anything less, or nothing might even happen at all, right? And things like you need the witnesses. Now you're going to say, well, our group of people can just come up and just lie and say, oh, we've witnessed this happen. But the thing is, it's not that straightforward. And honestly, I had an issue with this, but I realized that it's not that straightforward because Islam requires you to see the thing 100% without a shadow of a doubt. If we're talking about theft, you need to see it happen. Like you need to see that person take that thing from that threshold. Whatever, you need to see that person fulfill the criteria of theft, which you need to know itself, right? And if you don't know that, you go complain and you say, okay, I've seen this, this, this. If that does not meet the criteria to be considered legal theft, that punishment won't occur, right? And there's some criteria like, if is the money carried on the person, where is it stored, and does that make liable the punishment or not, right? Like for example, money stored in like specific, like stationary places are considered, safe places are considered, places where it's easy to pickpocket, things like that, they won't be considered for the theft laws. Rather, they'll be considered more for disciplinary action or other smaller punishments like that. Yeah, for example. My main point is that Islam and Sharia law itself is a very tiered process. It's not just, like very simple thing just like that. And actually, if you look at the colonial rulers who wanted to simplify Islam and strip it down from the culture and the cultural understanding and just, robotic rules, outdated rules, they even said when they first entered Muslim society that this Sharia law is too innocent. It doesn't want bloodshed. It doesn't want to harm people. It's actually made to help people. It's actually made to, make a better civilization. How can we destroy that? How did they break that? They broke it by separating just, laws on paper and lived practice. When lived practice and laws on paper don't match, then there's an issue. But the thing is, Islam has always considered lived practice and the customs and the rituals and the habits of the people when making laws in the first place. That's like that's one of the main things that Islamic law considers, to make sure that it's always relevant, modern, etc. whatever. And even nowadays we consider that, like rulings that might have been passed like 10 years ago, they're outdated nowadays. Same thing, we might say nope, that doesn't apply anymore. New ruling based on new understandings, new findings, new cultural understandings, new cultural acceptances. All those things, they're factored in. So when people demonize Sharia, it's because it got stripped from just heartless rules on paper, from the lived experience and reality of the people, of how the law was actually implemented, and also of the key ruling and the aspect of Sharia law itself, which is customs and cultural norms. That's a very key part of Sharia law which you need to consider. So the Sharia law in America and USA, if it were to be implemented, would be completely different to the Sharia law in per se Russia, or in per se China, or in per se, in other places like maybe Bangladesh, or maybe like Japan, or in Africa, any place in Africa like Nigeria, Somalia, any of those places. My point is, it would be different region to region based on the cultural customs, norms, and the expectations of people. That doesn't mean that we bend the rules. No, the rules stay the same, as in the fundamental rules of the fundamental principles, as I call it, they stay the same. Like for example, there is a punishment for theft. Theft is not allowed. Adultery is not allowed. There is a punishment for adultery, right? And like that, those rules won't change. Or same thing with like, if modesty rules won't change, or for example, no interest won't change. That won't change. But the way business contracts are done, that will change. The way modesty is expressed, that will change. The way that we define and what's correct and incorrect will change based on what that thing is, what is that custom, what is that practice, and how to tackle it, and how does it influence the people. So I just want to make a video about that because that honestly doesn't get looked at enough. Because Islam is such a beautiful religion, and the Sharia law that I propose is actually a very, very, very. It's not just a simple thing. It's very layered. Islam, you have to understand this. Islam's never just a like it just on the surface kind of thing, like, oh, it just said that, that's it. It's always layered because you'll always have things that are like supposedly on the surface contradicting each other, because Islam is such a broad kind of religious frame that it can't just be, oh, one ruling and that just applies to everyone, because that doesn't work. It gives different rules to different people, facilitating to their needs and the wants of different people. If you want me to just go into adultery ruling, for example, I can go into that same, like, say, apply the same principle that we talked about in the theft aspect of it. If you can go back and revisit that if you just want, right? Again, for witnesses, they'll be questioned that did actual, like, did they witness the actual, you know, entrance, if I want to say, or penetration, if you want to call that. They need to see that actual penetration, not like two people on a bed together. No, that's not enough proof. You need four people that witness actual penetration, right, for them to undergo the actual what do you call it, the punishment for zina. And even then, they'll be given multiple chances to deny it if there's any doubt. And if there's any, for example, the judge will also consider factors like when he's asking them, and he'll interrogate them separately, he'll ask them the full detail of the story. He'll be like, okay, tell me the story, how did it happen? They'll say this. If there's any discrepancy in the details based on the angle, perspective, time of day, anything, the whole thing will be called off. But if they all somehow match up, and they all get their story straight somehow, right? And it's all fully the same, which honestly, about that kind of case is crazy to come up unless you really planned it, like fully to the T, like to the detail, like the littlest of details, right? Because that's why he's gonna get to the nitty gritty stuff, right? Everything. How did you see it? When did you see it? From what angle? What time of day? When? How? Why? All that stuff. Everything. If you get all of that correct, then he will also consider other factors like, is there a possibility, do for these families have a rivalry with this other family? Do they have any vendettas against this person? Do they have a reason, external reason, for example, hate, envy, and something, that another reason that could be causing them to give false testimony? If there is, then the whole thing will be called off. And not only that, but there's a punishment for false testimony as well. If you are caught with false testimony in, for example, Western countries, there's no actual thing about. I mean, there is a legal punishment. Don't get me wrong, but in and the same thing applies with Islamic law, but in Islamic law, or the punishment for false testimony is that that person's testimony will never be taken legally ever again. Like, that person will never be able to give testimony in any legal case for anything, in any legal thing ever again, like, at all. So they've lost a big legal agency of testimony, like witnessing a crime, witnessing something happen, anything. They've lost all those privileges. Now they're no longer trusted in their community like that, and they've lost that respect and that, legal agency. So there's a big thing that you lose. And also, when it comes to punishments like adultery, if you accuse someone of adultery and you're caught accusing them falsely, the punishment is death for you. It's not death for the person, it's death for you. You yourself are off your head, or off with your head, or like, you are given the death penalty because you basically risk someone's life. It's only appropriate that your own life be taken, tit for tat kind of thing, that principle again. So if someone works on principles, then the expression, then it sets out the rules as well, but the expression of that will be different based on culture, lived experience, and how it's implemented is also different. So please consider that when you hear like a strict kind of ruling, or Islam says this about thieves, Islam says this about people who do adultery, or they say flog or death sentence, or same thing with the like the homosexual behavior. It's very nuanced. There's key fundamental and ideological differences between Islam and the Western paradigms and ideologies, which is why when you say something and you try and mix the two, like, for example, it's not accurate to say that like, gay people are hated in Islam, or it's not correct to say that, can I be gay and Muslim? Because the question doesn't make sense, because Islam doesn't affirm a person being gay in the first place, whereas the West does. Islam doesn't. Like, Islam says your desires don't define your identity. So even if you were someone who has preference to the same sex, you drink, you do adultery, that doesn't define your identity. That defines a repeated pattern of action, but it doesn't define you as a person, and doesn't define an identity. Your identity is purely tied to your religion, your faith, and your morals and stuff, not necessarily things like your preferences, things like that. Rather, we'd say, look, you have a preference, no problem. You work on that. It's like a person who has a addiction to drugs. It's like a person who has addiction to alcohol. It's like a person who fornicates a lot. That's incorrect. We accept that. You need to fix that. We wouldn't label that person. Do you get what I'm saying? Unless like there's a reason to like a label like that. But those cases are a bit different. But when it comes to sexuality, Islam doesn't label on the basis of sexuality. So to say that gay people get the death sentence is incorrect, because people didn't identify by those labels in the first place back then, because they didn't exist, right? They're only a modern construct. Even if you do go by that paradigm, Islam doesn't acknowledge that paradigm, and it doesn't punish you for the feeling, it punishes you for acting it out. And even if you act out, you need to be caught by the same, ruling and strict monitoring as is caught with, normal adultery cases for that to happen. And even then, if there's any shadow of a doubt, there's that. And also, even people talk about like it's like a homogenized ruling again. Again, when it comes to things like homosexuality and same-sex attraction, because that's more appropriate to say than a label, right? Because we don't even affirm the label. Then when it comes to same-sex attraction, Islam says there's varied rulings between scholars about what the punishment is. Some say disciplinary action, some say just lashes, some say death, right? And that's the most extreme ruling. So so it really depends on, again, where you live, whatever, and the circumstances. So it's very circumstantial. It's case by case. You can't give a general ruling like that. Of course, there is that precedent that some scholars will say, if you are caught, then yes, that is the thing. But that's if you are caught, and to be caught is quite hard, to be frank. And obviously, same thing with leaving Islam rulings. Some people will be like, but in Sharia they trap you once you leave. It's like death sentence. Well, that's because when religion and politics are together, and then there is a political implication in you leaving a faith. For example, if a country makes all of its rules according to a certain religion. Imagine, for example, if USA became a Christian nation, right? And they lived by Christian laws, and they accept minorities, but they have rules and conditions and whatever, but they live by Christian laws, right? That dictate how, the legal system and everything, right? If a person now just leaves that is a political threat. Do you get what I'm saying? It's like saying, it's the modern equivalent of that would be like, for example, if someone has like USA citizenship, right? And then all of a sudden they do activities that cause unrest, that cause that cause people to become divided in the community for no reason. And also they renounce their USA citizenship, or like, they do you get what I'm saying? Randomly. It'd be a cause of suspicion. It'd be like, why are you just renouncing your US citizenship? You've lived here, you've lived amongst us, all this stuff, that's who you were. All of a sudden you renounce it like that. Do you get what I'm saying? It shows there could be ulterior motives as to why they're renouncing, because they don't have any actual legitimate reasons to do so. If they had any actual concerns, and this is also addressed, if the person had any legitimate reasons, like for example, they didn't agree with something in the belief system, whatever, they are given time to have those things explained and addressed, because Islam has solutions and answers to those questions that a lot of people have that would make them, not want to believe in it at first. If after given the explanations, you still have, that shows that it's not a well thought out reason, rather it's just a emotional reason, and you must have some kind of reason to go against the state, because that's what it was a state. So hence why, it's like preservation, like at that point, if you're a security hazard in any country, would they want to give you citizenship? No. Hence why, if they became a security hazard for the Muslims, and hence why, death penalty was there. So I'm not saying the death penalty is, oh, it's nice, amazing, we want to kill people, but I'm saying you need to see the thought processes behind why people do something, and also it's about preserving the welfare of people over just the life of one person. Do you get what I'm trying to say? Like, we want to save everyone's life, but if one person's causing the whole community and is being a security risk for the whole community, then shouldn't that person be the one that's removed or exiled or killed even by death sentence, instead of jeopardizing the safe living of everyone else? And another thing which I want to talk about, which Islamic Sharia law does, which the Western paradigm has never actually been able to do, is allow minority groups to live under their rule by their own jurisdiction. What do I mean by that? I mean that even though Christians, Jews, and other people of other faiths lived under Islamic rule, they didn't have to, practice the personal aspects of the faith. For example, modesty rules, the same way they apply to Muslims, they don't apply to, people of other faiths. The way they do business, the way they do their marriages, the way they do their family disputes, all of that stuff, the personal stuff, the worship, the rituals, all that, that's left to that community. They micromanage their own communities, right, with their own laws. But if they violate any of the social laws, like for example, theft, adultery, even adultery, I don't even know, but things like theft, social unrest, things like that, or they cause an unrest to the Muslim population, then of course, then we would consider legal punishment for these people. Otherwise, they're just free to do their thing on their, their own communities, their own thing. So we've had a historical example of minorities living comfortably and being able to practice their cultures and religious traditions freely, to whatever degree, to a very good degree, if you ask me, and follow their own rules. Whereas we haven't seen that for the Muslims in the Western paradigm or in non-Muslim paradigms by non-Muslim laws. Anyway, I hope that clarifies some things, and I hope that makes you just open your mind up to, the whole idea of it. And I really recommend watching some videos on it. Some brothers have made some really good videos on it, and I'm just sharing my own insights about it, which I think are very valuable. Anyway, thank you for joining, and to all my non-Muslim followers, I hope this really makes you open your mind up to Muslims and just see us as humans first and foremost, that we do have a rich history, and we need to bridge the gap between us. We need to have dialogue, we need to have conversation, we need to speak, right? And there's not enough people speaking about it, and there's not enough people talking about it, there's not enough people asking questions. If we can have that, we can have a more united society, and that's what we want. We want unity. We want unity as Muslims, right? And as humans in general, we want unity, because whether people like to admit it or not, we live in Western lands. A lot of them people who live in Western countries, we live in Western communities, and naturally, as human beings, we want good for that community. Whether religion says, "Oh, this, that," we want good for that community. So there's that. So naturally, we'd want good for everyone in the community, and we wouldn't want anything bad to happen, because we've lived here, we've grown up here, our friends are here, families are here, etc. So let's just open that dialogue. Let's get people understanding. Let's start asking questions and bridge the gap. Anyway, thank you for tuning in, and I hope everyone has a good day. And to all my Muslim viewers, Assalamu alaikum.